Yes.
রেকর্ড হচ্ছে ঠিক আছে হ্যাঁ I can trip on this, that's fine. So the big original work in economics is published in 1776 by Adam Smith. Adam Smith, the main idea of Adam Smith, I want to tell you a little bit about. You may have learnt about it in your economics class, but I'll tell you. You know, if you look at the world, there is a bit of a puzzle. A farmer is sowing seeds, growing crops, which the farmer is not going to eat. The farmer will eat a little part of it. Someone else will eat. Someone is stitching clothes, which maybe one that person will wear, but is for someone else to wear. So if you look at that world, if someone from outside looks at the world, people are doing things not for themselves, but for someone else. A question does arise in your head. Are these just such generous, good human beings that they are doing all this for others? Or is there a dictator sitting at the top who's saying, you produce food, you produce clothing? The answer is no. And Adam Smith, suddenly it struck Adam Smith that what is making these people work is their own interest. They are going to then someone will give food to someone else and will get clothing from someone else. So you're doing this in your own interest because you will use it to get something else. And that he gave it a name which became very famous. He called it the invisible hand. Have you heard of the expression, the invisible hand, in any of your economics courses? Anushi, since you said you've done a little bit of economics, have you heard this term, invisible hand? No. The invisible hand, Adam Smith said, is the hand of the market that brings the tailor, the farmer, the doctor together. That it's through the market that I produce something, I give it to someone else produces something, gives it to me, so we are all satisfied. That happened through the slightly mysterious way. He called it the invisible hand of the market. And from this, like in game theory, there was almost a theorem, which Adam Smith wrote in plain English, no mathematics, which is, if each one of us looks after our own interests, in certain conditions, the market can bring order. I am growing the food out of my own interest, not a huge amount to feed other people, but my interest is to look after myself. The tailor is making lots of clothing, not because the tailor loves others. It will be good if the tailor loves others, but even if the tailor did not love others, the tailor is doing it because the tailor wants to then give away the clothing, get some food, get some medicine, etc. So this led to an important idea in economics, that even if individuals pursue their own self-interest, you can get social order. That was called the invisible hand of the market. So idea 1876. It is, তোমার এটা নিয়ে তুমি কি ঘোরাতে হচ্ছে বারবার, আমি থাকবো, আমি রাফলি এইখানে থাকবো, হ্যাঁ খুব একটা ঘোরাতে হবে না। হ্যাঁ এবার আই থিঙ্ক এখানে জাস্ট রেখে দিলে এবার ফাইন। নাও ঠিক আছে, হ্যাঁ কিছু দরকার হলে বলো আমাকে। So that was the big idea in economics. It was given out in words, but you know, it is quite a mysterious idea, because first sight and someone from outside observing the world will think maybe there's a dictator who says you produce clothes because others need it, you produce food because others need it. Adam Smith says, no, it is the market which has this strange capacity to bring it all together. But this idea has been misused a lot. Very often, some people will say it's good enough to be selfish because you'll still get order because of Adam Smith's idea. This is a complicated thing. I don't want to get into the details, but I just want to remind you something which is worth keeping in mind, which economists don't stress. Adam Smith began his career as professor of moral philosophy. And one of Adam Smith's closest friends is a philosopher I admire greatly, David Hume. David Hume, there are many great philosophers who are not very good human beings. Human beings are complicated. You can be not a good human being, but a brilliant human being. There are people like that. But David Hume, I think, was a very, very good human being as well. So was Adam Smith. Adam Smith was very mild and shy. Hume used to speak out clearly and all, and controversial views, but there was some kindness, goodness with them. Very unusual people. About Adam Smith, there's a little thing we economists joke and say that the history of economics as a discipline would be different. When he was 4 years old, he was kidnapped by some gypsies in Scotland. And if he was not rediscovered again and brought back, it is believed that he was also so abstract-minded, he would have done a lot of harm to the gypsies through his absent-mindedness, and also economics would not have progressed, but he was found and brought back. Both of them never got married. Each of them lived with their mothers, Adam Smith with Adam Smith's mother, David Hume with David Hume's mother, but they were very good friends. Through life, they were together, and David Hume dies in the year that Adam Smith a famous book is coming out. And David Hume, even I do appreciate the fact that he was also a moral philosopher. And when he's dying, he gives out a message to his friends and enemies saying, I know some of my enemies will be disappointed, but my friends will be very happy that though I'm dying a happy person. And on the 4th of July, when he knew he was dying, he called all his friends together, and there was a beautiful occasion. David Hume sits with them, talks, chats, and then after a few weeks, he passes away. These are the characters who are at the start of economics. Then, the idea of prices. Late Adam Smith in 1776, the big work. 100 years are passing, people are trying to give greater shape. One thing that was troubling people in a big way is, how is the price of an object determined? Let us suppose that this is 10 taka. Why is this 10 rupees? What is it that makes this 10 rupees and makes this 2 rupees? This was the question that a whole lot of people were trying to answer. One theory was that it's the content of labor that goes into this is what makes it more valuable. If a lot of labor goes into producing this will be more expensive than the other ones. But you can see some examples where it's not the amount of labor that matters, it's something else. I'll give you an example. Suppose your name is Ohana, right? Ohana, you've done a painting, quite good. You spent 2 hours and done a painting. Picasso, you've heard of Picasso. Picasso also spends 2 hours and does a painting. Don't feel bad, Picasso's painting will sell for a much higher price than your painting, right? All of our painting. Why is that? 2 hours of labor went into yours, 2 hours of labor went into Picasso's painting. One will go for a much higher price. So there's something more than just labor. Is it labor and talent? There are things where labor hasn't gone in, talent has not gone in, but still has value. If you find gold on the ground, that has been produced by no one, it's lying there, it'll have a huge amount of value. So the question started arising in people's minds as to what gives value to an object. And there, the Smith and all were the early ideas. A person, again, I'm giving you the economists I like, who's also personalities I like a lot. Stanley Jevons. Slightly depressive person, used to occasionally get depressed, but again, a very good human. Stanley Jevons. he gets the idea how prices are formed. This is in 1862. And Jevons has a diary entry on the 19th of February. He says, I've suddenly got a discovery in my head. I can't now read earlier writings anymore because I've suddenly realized that people were not understanding how prices are formed. I will try to give you a bit of an idea of how prices are formed with Jevons's work, which is 1862. The reason I like Jevons is in 1872, when Jevons's second edition of his book was coming out. So when it's coming out, Jevons discovers that there was a person in Germany called Hermann Heinrich Gossen, who had written Jevons's ideas about 15 years before Jevons. He had written those down. Hermann Heinrich Gossen, just to remember. Gossen's life is a tragedy. Jevons it's his greatness. When the second edition comes out, Jevons says that I can no longer have the honor of being the first person who discovered it. This idea had been discovered by another person about whom I know nothing. I don't even know if he's alive. I've just seen his writings, and he had understood the same ideas. And Gossen's life is very sad. He died in 1854. So when Jevons is writing saying, I don't even know who he is, where he is, but I've seen his writings, he was already dead and gone. And Gossen died a sad person because in his book, he begins with a lot of pride. He says, I will do for the human sciences what Copernicus had done for the stars. So he is full of that. He's got this great discovery of understanding different human beings, their interaction, but no one discovered his work. He died, and it's believed, now we know in retrospect, in his last year, he went around from one German town to another, getting hold of copies of his book to burn them, saying that no one has taken note of them, I just want to destroy my work. That is Jevons in the back, Gossen in the background. Jevons makes this discovery, gives the credit to Gossen. I will try to explain this a little bit, and I'll also try to show you a video. I don't know if it will go well. My son, who teaches Cornell, he teaches economics in New York. He makes videos it is for first year undergraduate students. I'll show you one of them. It's a 5-6 minute video. I'll see if you follow. But let me explain a little bit in words, what is it that these people are doing about the formation of prices? Yes, okay. The main thing is price depends on our own valuation of something. Whether or not labor has gone in, anything has gone into it, it's the value that matters. And let me try to show this to you as follows. Let's take Picasso's paintings over here. One painting, two paintings, three paintings. Picasso will, and let's say very similar paintings Picasso is producing. This is quantity. Number of paintings. And how much people value each painting of Picasso's. Let's say that the first one, you feel if the first piece of painting is valued at 100 lakhs, a huge amount in Picasso. The second piece is valued at this. The third piece is valued at this. You will get a line like this. This is called a demand curve. Have you come across the demand curve in the economics that you learned? No. Okay. What this means is, a demand curve is, this is price over here. If the price is, let's say if the price is P, and this is the demand curve. If this is the price, this will be the demand. If this is the price, this will be the demand. If this is the price, this will be the demand. If this is the price, the demand is going to be this much. Actually, why think of Picasso's painting? Think of anything else. Homes, houses. If the price of the house is this much, the demand is going to be this much. That's what the demand curve says. If the price of homes comes, first it was P, let us say it becomes P hat, price comes down. What do you think will happen to the demand for homes? How many people will demand homes? If the price of homes is cheaper, you can buy homes more easily. More will demand. So, when price was P, demand was X. When price is P hat, demand becomes X hat. So, this is the demand curve. And there's also supply, depending on how many houses you have, and price is formed by the interaction between demand and supply. If suddenly, let us say that, let me give you an example. I'll make the supply very simple. This is the demand curve. You've got the picture of the demand curve here, and I'll make the supply vertical. Let's say there are these many homes, from 0 to X. There are X homes. You're trying to sell them. This is the demand, this is the supply of homes. If this is the price, suppose prices, forget these prices, price is P hat. Can you see what the demand will be? How much demand will there be? Correct. There will be this much demand. But I've already told you supply is this much. If there are so many homes and price is P hat, demand is for this much, what will happen? There are too many homes. People will all get their homes and then there are more. What do you think will happen to the price of homes? There are many homes. Price will begin to fall. So, if this is the supply and this is the demand, price will fall to this level. If price fell to an even lower level, if price was say P star, can you see what will happen? Demand will be huge, supply is less, price will begin to rise. So price gets formed by this, let me call it P bar. If this is the demand curve and this is the supply curve, then the price of houses will be P bar. That's the way prices get formed. This was the idea that is born through Jevons's idea, that it's the demand, how we prefer, depending. And so for Picasso, if people like Picasso's art, price is going to be very high. And if people like Mohona's art, even more, your price of art will be even greater. But human preference matters. It's not just labor and content of that is finally determining price, and the theory takes off. Little side note about Jevons. Jevons's son got interested in the stars and the movement and the connection with the earth. And do you know where he chose to settle down? Jevons's son. Anyone can guess. No reason why you will be able to guess. But the fact that I'm asking you, can you guess which country he settled in, should give you a hint. Very good, you took the hint. It wasn't. He settled down in Allahabad. Jevons's son came to Allahabad, settled down all his life, he was there. And India's first journal of economics was started by Jevons's son. Jevons's son made no great contributions to economics, but he lived here, happily taught, and started the Journal of Economics. Stanley Jevons died, he drowned. He was not old enough, he was swimming in a pond in England when he drowned, and Jevons passed away with that. Okay, so this is the way the price formation is done. I will now show you a video. I'm curious whether you will follow. The video shows how the labor price is formed, wages. Let me just explain. Wages are also formed very similarly. There's a demand for labor, there is a supply for labor. Let us say there is these many workers available. And this is the wage rate on this axis. If the wage is less, the demand for labor will go up. That's obvious. If it's very cheap, you ask for a lot of labor. If wage is high, you demand very little labor. So this is if this is the demand curve for labor, and there are these many workers available, the wage is going to be here. The question that economists have asked is, at times, this wage can be very low. I'll give you an example. Suppose this is now change the axis, this is the quantity, labor, amount of labor, this is wage. Labor, and if you want American spelling, the U should not be there. If you want Indian English spelling, the U should be there. Labor, this is, and this is the demand for labor. Suppose the supply of labor is huge. Can you see what the wage rate will be? Yes. Where demand is equal to supply, we have very low wage rate. This leads to a bit of a problem. If wage rate is very low, okay, if the price of apples is low, if Picasso's art is low, it doesn't matter. But if wage rate is very low, people will suffer. It is their livelihood. That's when you do need the government to come in, to interfere with the functioning of the market, to try to influence this. And this is experimental. I'm trying my son's video, which tries to explain about the use of market prices. He loves teaching, so sometimes I'll have to bring him here. So that kind of a coordinator.
A central feature of modern life is the exchange of goods and services. You might sell pizza in Namur and use the money earned to buy eggs in Maharashtra or sunglasses in Mumbai. The sunglass seller might use his earnings to then buy ice cream in Singapore, and the ice cream seller might go on vacation to Mexico City to buy books. These exchanges happen at particular prices. There is a price for jeans, a slice of pizza, a Nicolas Cage blanket, a beer, even a price for a nuisance. And sometimes prices are misleading, like in Manhattan parking garages, where the all-day price covers only half an hour. A major goal of economics is to understand where the prices of these goods and services come from. What makes a price reasonable or fair? And should the government forcibly control prices? These questions are especially important when it comes to the price of labor. Most of us need to work for a living, and that often means selling our labor in labor markets. The price of this labor, in other words, the hourly wage, has a very direct impact on workers' lives. And there is a long tradition of intellectual thought, labor activism, and government policy, all sharing the premise that the market cannot be left to its own devices. The most famous of the thinkers is perhaps Karl Marx, who argued that capitalist systems inherently exploit workers. In an audacious snub, when Walmart entered Germany, it set up its Berlin store on Karl Marx Strasse. But, for the record, the street name survived. The Walmart did not. Second, labor activism and unions have a rich history, including in the United States. You can see here that union membership in the US, indicated by the blue line, grew until the mid-20th century and has since been falling. Even through the decline, there have been legendary activists like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, who helped organize farm workers to collectively demand higher wages and more humane working conditions. Third, governments play a direct role in regulating labor markets through safety standards, laws against exploitation, and most notably, the minimum wage. In the US, a federal minimum wage was established in 1938 under the Fair Labor Standards Act. The green line on this graph shows that the minimum wage has been rising over time, but adjusted for inflation, you get the blue line. Changes.
I wanted to just explain to you minimum wage, the law, what it does, and then again you'll pick it up over there. See, if this is the demand for labor, this is the supply of labor, left to the market, no one intervening, the wage rate will become W, very low wage. Now, if the government comes in and says that, look, this is unacceptable, so low, let us have a law saying no one can employ workers below W bar. Okay? Can you tell me what will happen to the demand for labor? How much labor will be demanded? Can you, from this graph, read out how much labor will be demanded? If this is the wage can't go less than this. Yes, your action was the correct action, so I'm showing you that. This will be the demand for labor. But how many people will be wanting, if this is the wage, how many people are supplying labor? Yes. Up to here. So there will be unemployment that will start up. So the worry is, if you raise the minimum wage without doing anything else, you will keep raising unemployment because the demand for labor will go down, the supply remains large. What will I ask you?
That the minimum wage has fallen for over 50 years, though in many states, including New York, it's higher. As the economy evolves, we are back to debating the role of the government in labor markets. There are many important questions. Should gig workers be protected by minimum wage laws? What should the minimum wage for tipped workers be? And the big one, should the federal government raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour or even more? These are complex questions that we might use a model to analyze. Think of an economic model as scaffolding, a bare-bones framework for analyzing the world. Sometimes the scaffolding yields useful insights, but good economics also means one should not accept it at face value. We should poke and prod to make sure it isn't missing any important parts. But in order to critically examine the scaffolding, we have to build it first. Let's do that. First, think about people like you and me, the suppliers of labor. If the going wage is low, not many people will choose to work, so not much labor will be supplied. As the wage rises, working becomes attractive to more people, so more labor is supplied. This gives us a labor supply curve. It tracks how much labor is supplied at any given wage. Next, imagine there are lots of little firms that are considering hiring labor. Some have a high marginal product of labor, meaning that labor is vital to their production. Others have a low marginal product of labor. So, at any going wage, the only firms that will demand labor are those whose marginal product is higher than the wage. After all, you only want to hire labor if the resulting benefits outweigh your costs. So, as the wage drops, more firms will demand labor. This gives us the demand curve. Now, let's combine the supply and demand curves to think about market dynamics. Suppose, for example, that the going wage is lower than the point of intersection. Then firms want to hire a lot of labor, but people don't want to work that much. So, in order to attract workers, some firms will start outpaying others. As long as this labor shortage persists, there will be upward pressure on wages. As we saw in recent months when employers like McDonald's started offering higher starting wages. On the other hand, if wages are higher than this point of intersection, people want to supply a lot of labor, but firms don't want to hire as much. So we would be in a state of unemployment. When there is unemployment, people struggle to find work. Some of them are willing to work for less than the going wage, because a low wage is better than nothing. So there would be a downward pressure on wages. Because of these natural pressures, the going wage will tend to stabilize around E. This is called the labor market equilibrium. This equilibrium is considered efficient in the sense that we have exhausted all opportunities for mutually beneficial exchanges of labor between workers and employers. This is the scaffolding, a model of supply and demand in a competitive market. A minimum wage law forces the wage up. This helps employed workers, but there are potential downsides. These downsides have been emphasized by thoughtful conservative economists like Milton Friedman, and also by nutty ideologues like Dennis Prager, the founder of Prager University, which is not a university. In a competitive labor market, a mandated minimum wage would make labor less attractive to employers. In response, firms might move production overseas or switch to mechanization. Stores would use drone deliveries, restaurants would use electric roti makers, and babysitting services would use electric grandmothers. So, those workers who were lucky enough to get jobs would see their wages go up, but total employment would drop. So, for those workers who were now left unemployed, their wages would effectively have fallen to zero. Is this basic story correct? Let's visit Cambridge University in the 1930s, where the brilliant socialist economist Joel Robinson.
Actually, we can stop this because I will pick it up from here and explain a little bit more. So we can stop this now. See, the problem that is being pointed out, I have a vertical supply curve, he had an upward sloping supply curve, but otherwise it's the same analysis. The problem with all such use of minimum wage is you will increase unemployment. But we do know, and this gets more complicated, so I don't want to bother you with this. There are more complicated labor market structures where higher wages at times don't cause unemployment to go up. And you can agree, many will agree that minimum wage has to be there, and you have to provide, the government has to provide support for the unemployed people, those who don't get jobs. So when you go for a higher minimum wage, you may want to provide other kinds of interventions so that workers who don't get jobs will be absorbed over here. This is such a big topic, the management of the labor market, that it's unfair for me to inflict this on you, but it is a bit of a challenge. There are many good economists who will say, don't do anything on the labor market. Leave it to the natural market forces, whatever happens. There, that machines are coming in that are taking over normal work. So increasingly, the demand for labor is, earlier I had this kind of demand for labor. If machines come in, then at every wage, right now at the wage, W bar, this was the demand for labor. What will happen if machines come in? At W bar, the demand for labor will be a little bit less. At this higher wage, W prime, earlier this was the demand, but when machines come in, demand will be a little less. So when new machines come in, the demand for labor curve will become like this. The wage is going to drop even lower. And this is happening. We have data over the last, if you get interested in looking at numbers and statistics, I have it with me over the last 50 years, all over, especially in the advanced economies, wages are tending to drop because machines are coming in. Big complicated problem, how do you get it? But to me, this cannot be just left fully to the market, saying whatever the market does is good. We are here collectively human beings, and that's the purpose of the government, to get in, take decisions, intervene in certain ways. I will change topics to something else now, but tell me, any questions you have on this demand, supply, price formation, wages? Yes.
Sir, if the machines will take every part in, if they will do everything, then later, how will then humans, how will they?
Good you're asking, but see, so if it is the case that machines gradually take over all labor. If that is what is going to happen, then that is going to happen. We have to live with it. How do you live with it is the question. Many people say that the advance of technology should be stopped. I don't agree with that, and also I don't believe it is possible to stop the advance of technology. Advance of technology is not President Biden doing it, Prime Minister Modi doing it, Xi Jinping in China doing it. No individual is doing it. We are making little discoveries. I'm sitting and discovered, oh, new way of doing something. You are playing around, you discover another technological breakthrough. Hundreds and thousands of people making technological breakthrough, machines are evolving, new machines. So to me, the advance of technology is a bit like gravity. If you don't like, there's good reason not to like gravity. It keeps pulling us down. I'm trying to go up, it pulls us down. But if we get angry with gravity, it's a useless anger. In fact, it's best not to be angry even with individuals who you think are doing harm. I take the view that an individual who does harm, in your mindset, you have to take steps to stop. But it's the way we handle tigers. We don't get angry with tigers. That's the fights. We take steps to stop that measure. And that's the way from human beings to anything you should do. And rise of technology is a bit like that. It's a mechanism that is happening. So what do we do about it? And there is something to be done. I personally believe if machines took over most of the labor, in itself, this would not be a tragedy, but for one fact. The way we have constructed our economy, the people who own the machines, they begin to get the incomes. So we have to change that. That it cannot be that all income will go to those who own the machines. If the machines are owned collectively, then if machines take over all the work, we are sitting, listening to music, going for boating, looking at, and machines and robots are doing everything. But if all of us can share what's coming out of that, then it would not be such a tragedy. Which is a bit of a revolutionary way to go about in terms of policy making. That you cannot have the owners of the machines get all the income and others are left with nothing. So my view, the question you're raising is coming up every day. In America, they are even more worried than here because our labor being cheaper, as the world is getting connected, American labor is being shipped over to developing countries. So American workers are very upset. I mean, I can sense that when I go into small villages outside where I live, you can meet people who are upset that the work has gone. But my point is, and there are many people who are writing about it, there is an economist in New York, Debraj Rai. He has been writing with Kalle Moine in Norway. There are economists in America writing that you have to have sharing arrangements. So the fact that technological advances taking place, you can't do much about, but the rewards of that, you have to have mechanisms of sharing. I gave a very long answer to your question because it is a deep question. Anything else? Anyone? Just questions, criticisms, you don't like something, tell me. Yes.
So for example, like you say, if you form a graph like this, some people are unemployed, government is providing them jobs. Again, if you form the same demand graph, again some people are unemployed. Now if we make this graph like year on year for different jobs, there will be always people unemployed. Ultimately.
Explain that to me again, I didn't follow.
And on this graph you show, there's some people after the job rate, like wage rate, some people are unemployed. Government is providing them jobs.
Yes.
Now if we pop again a different graph, demand graph for the job provided by the government.
Yes.
There will be more people, like there in that graph there are some people unemployed.
Yeah.
Like again and again make that graph, like again curve, there will always people are unemployed. Is there a way to end that, like?
So sit down, I'm going to try to give an answer. Tell me if I'm getting your question right. When you get, the figure is getting messy now. Suppose this was the supply curve, let's get back to the original demand curve. Wages here, there is this much unemployment. One way also to get around that is to have the government provide employment. So the government can say that, well, this is the market, demand, market supply, but we can provide employment. The government begins to employ. What will that do to that? Certain amount the government can do, but here comes macroeconomics, which is important. If the government is employing them in productive ways, they are getting employed, they are producing something, there are goods, wages being given out, not too much problem. But if government begins to employ people unproductively, they are given a salary, they sit down and do nothing. Can you guess if the government, how will government pay them? First of all, there are many things government can do. Government can tax, government can print money. You can print money and pay people, and you begin to employ. If you do too much of that, can you guess what will begin to happen? Inflation will start. Because people are getting money in their hands, very good. Money in their hands, goods are not being produced by that. Inflation will start. So government's action is a very different, I worked in the Indian government when inflation was high. It's a very big problem. You can't very quickly pull it back. At the same time, you know that there have been mistakes in the past, too much money has been created, and that's floating around. So the problem with the government has to step in, and there's a lot of uncertainty about how you step in right, how you step in wrong, but you have to step in and absorb some of this labor. But you have to watch inflation. Inflation, we worry. I want to tell you, right now, inflation is about, 7% or 8% inflation, which means what is what is 1 rupee? One at the end of the year will be 1 rupee and 8 paisa. 8% inflation. If inflation is 10 rupees, what is 1 rupee will become? If inflation is 100%, what is 1 rupee at the end of the year will become how much? Will become 2 rupees. That's 100% inflation. So we've had 100% inflation India's never had, independent India's never had. Independent India's highest inflation was in 1973, about 30% it was going. But other countries have had high inflation. Do you know the world's record inflation? Which country has that? Have you read any stories of hyperinflation? This is called Germany. Germany is actually the second highest, but Germany is the most talked about case. Hungary is the highest in Hungary in 1946, but I'll tell you about the German hyperinflation. What was happening is, this is 1923. Germany had been forced to repay for the war crimes, and they were printing money and paying back. So marks were being printed. After some time, inflation started. When inflation started, people were suffering. How do you solve the problem? Government would print more money and hand out to them. German inflation reached what was it mark at that time? I forget. What was the currency? 1 mark. At the end of the year, like 100% inflation will take you to 2. 1 mark. What was 1 mark at the end of the year was 10, not 100, not 1,000. 19 zeros. That's the inflation. So people would go with bag loads of currency to buy a small object. So you can't imagine, and they say that if you're in a restaurant drinking coffee for a long time, the price will go up of the coffee while you're sitting there. So people would quickly take it. So it was 1923 in Germany was devastating. And Hungary was even worse. Then there has been Zimbabwe more recently. Even if you look at relatively contemporary history, South Korea, before it started booming and doing well, inflation had gone very high. India, we've had inflation, and in a poor country, it's very, very painful when inflation takes place, but it's mismanagement of inflation can be devastating for an economy. Very long conversation I went to just drawn in by this. Anything else you want to ask on any topic? Yes, please do. And also teachers and others coming.
Sir, in the graph that you drew, was demand a constant? Like, does it remain as a constant?
Yeah, I drew a curve where the demand curve was constant, but what does happen, I'll show you. If everything, and that's why this Jevons and others we were talking about, the theory is complicated. I'm giving you a glimpse of it because they are not always constant. They also move around. But so here's an example. Suppose this is fish. No, this is, let us say, Ilish. This is, I'm violating the language code. I'm calling it Ilish. This is a demand for Ilish. And this is the price. Straight. This is the price of Ilish. Now let us say that we eat two kinds of fish, Ilish and Rui. This is the demand for Ilish. If there's some price for Rui, hold that constant. This is the demand for Ilish. If the price of Rui goes up, earlier, when it was, say, price is P, you demand this much Ilish. And you buy some Ilish, and there's price for Rui, you buy Rui as well. Now let us say the price of Rui goes up. What will happen to the demand? If the price remains the same for Ilish, what will happen to the demand for Ilish? Will go up. Rui price has gone up, you can't eat Rui, so you'll say, at this price, I'll buy more Ilish. So if the price of Rui goes up, the demand for Ilish is going to go up. For every price, you would have a higher amount of Ilish. So the prices of different markets are interlinked. And if price of something, if wages go up, the demand for Ilish will go up. You can buy more Ilish. So all these prices are linked together, and when all the prices come together, so demand is equal to supply, that is called the general equilibrium. The whole economy has reached an equilibrium. I want to change topic a little bit. Any other question? Yes, please ask.
So how government will decide like how many notes will be printed in a year?
Nowadays, the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank, has developed fairly clear rules. This is the printing of money and the management of inflation is not science. In economics, there are some branches which are scientific, some which are half guess, half data work. Inflation management is half guesswork, half data work. Government has developed certain rules of if this is the situation in the economy, this is the maximum amount of money you print. You put restrictions on yourself. And that's because we know that there are horrific stories like Germany, Hungary, where inflation can go completely out of control and then it's chaos in the country. So there are many rules by which the central bank does it. The rules are not hard rules, so they will get criticism. And also exchange rate, dollar to rupee. The Reserve Bank, if you watch, they will be buying up dollars, selling dollars to stabilize the exchange rate. So these are things that the central bank continues to do. Yeah.
After German getting hyperinflation, then how did German come back to a good position?
They they declared a halt, changed the currency. When you're doing that, it's chaos because you're basically bringing the economy to a halt virtually and stabilized. So at the end of the year, it was just utter chaos. Unemployment was shooting up. And then they changed the currency. And the Hungarians had to do the same. It was unusable. And you know what happened in country, which one is this? Let me just not get it wrong. Ecuador, tiny country with a lot of Native Americans. One of my students there is in the central bank. Ecuador was not being able to manage their inflation at all. Inflation kept going high. They did something very unusual. They said, we are not going to use our own currency because we can't manage. So they started using American dollars. So if you go to Ecuador now, you have to use American dollars to buy goods and goods. So it's the American central bank which effectively is controlling Ecuador's inflation. But if you switch over to using another country's currency, there's one very big cost you're paying. You know what? How do you get hold of the American currency dollars to use in Ecuador? America's not going to print and give it to you. You have to sell off your goods, Ecuadorian goods to America to get hold of those dollars. Then you use it for transaction. So America benefits hugely when another country switches over to using its currency because then it has to get hold of American currency by selling its goods. That's what Ecuador has done and they are stuck in that situation. I mean, inflation management is half science, half intuition. It's quite fascinating. Richard, you were asking something.
So, we see the inflation rates are like 7%, 6%. But in the past, recent past, the price of goods have been going up in India, like anything basic goods like kerosene, cooking oil, and LPG cylinders. So, how is that? So, like inflation rate is showing only 7%, but
Yeah.
goods are going double, almost double.
Yeah, 2, 3 things to it. Till I was there in the Indian government, and this is a long history, India is very good with data release. So no matter how painful the data, Indian data comes out. And I know this when I went to the World Bank, where data used to come in from all over the world. And there used to be a lot of admiration for Indian data that a developing country just opens up and gives you the data. Chinese data, you can never be sure. And they won't give you the basic data, they'll tell you the fine. India will give the breakdown. I like to believe that is continuing, but governments have ways and governments don't like to give out data when it's very bad. So inflation also, of course, it's possible. Some prices are rising very fast, others are priced low, so the average is 7. But I don't know the details of how data is being handled. I do know certain kinds of data are unfortunately not coming out now in India. About a week ago, the Economist magazine wrote, census data, which will tell you a lot about how common people are doing. India is one of the world's gurus of census. When it was started, India was absolute pioneer. Census, the COVID stopped it, but even now, by now they should be collecting and releasing data. You can't do policy. Census data is being held back, not being given out. Inflation data, I don't know, but we have to keep in mind also that it could look less because some goods are rising a lot and some are rising less, but I don't know the details of what's happening behind the scene on that.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, like we know that inflation happens, then it creates a lot of disasters. But sir, inflation can happen when we distribute money all over, all to all people. But
Or to even to a few people, they will spend and that
Yes.
money will reach everywhere.
yes,
Yeah.
sir, if like somebody wants money from me, and like somebody wants 1,000 rupees from me, okay, and I print 1,000 rupees, and I only give to him to pay my what I took from him, and I'm paying to him back to him. Then how is inflation?
So let us suppose government prints a lot of money and gives it to one person or one big corporation. Soon that person or that corporation will buy things. So those notes will go elsewhere. So money, as soon as you release, no matter who you release, it begins to flow all over. So in the end, it's going to be a general price rise that you will end up with. The person you gave it to first will, of course, be very well off because that person has bought up a lot of goods. But the money is then going to be sloshing all over the economy. And then you have to pull it back, the money, which is very, very hard to do that when pulling money back. Yeah.
Sir, what if government prints very much money and keeps it with itself so that it can pay back debts to other countries and increase its reserves? So will it be inflation then?
So, very good question. These are very deep policy questions. So, if the government prints money and pays back others, that will cause an indirect inflation. And let me explain that to you. The government has borrowed money from someone else, spent it on other things. Strictly, the government is supposed to collect it, then pay back. When the time comes to pay back, you don't collect it. You've already put money into society, you don't collect it back. You just print and pay back. That will mean more money remains in the circulation because you printed to pay back, which you should have pulled out of the system. And in fact, would you ask this? Many of the hyperinflations, Germany, Hungary, Zimbabwe, part of the reason is their international borrowings, they were paying back by printing money. So they are leaving a lot of money in the system, just printing and paying back. Then you're just causing your own inflation. Yeah.
Just because it's so close by and happening currently, could you tell us the financial crisis that is happening in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I can tell you a little bit about that. Sri Lanka, economy, historically, I should tell you, it was quite a remarkable economy that a standard of living was very high for a poor country. So it used to be held up as an exemplary country where the government does a lot for poor people, supporting them and all. And in life expectancy, number of years you expect to live, Sri Lankans were much higher than India. Literacy used to be much higher than India. In India, Kerala is an outlier, a bit like Sri Lanka. Long life expectancy, very good literacy. Over time, little bits and pieces of problems were happening. But what happened recently is what you're asking. It's very recent. We don't fully understand, but here is the rough contour. Two, three different aspects of it. One, I don't want to exaggerate, but an element of that is there. A lot of Sri Lankan money was being borrowed from China. A part of the money they are borrowing from China, part of the money they are borrowing from the West. And Sri Lanka was running its economy. The COVID-19 did hit them very badly because Sri Lanka is a tourism country. So a lot of their income is people come, foreigners come, spend money, which makes them better off. They live by that. During the COVID, that went down. Very authoritarian leader, the Rajapakshas, they won't tolerate any other opinions, ideas coming into play. They made one move which no one fully understands why they did that, is fertilizers. They said that people have to use fertilizers which do not use certain kinds of chemicals because they can do long run damage. Fertilizers that are widely used, they suddenly put a halt to that. You know, there are many things we do know it's not quite right, does long run damage. But you can't suddenly put a halt to that. They did that, and the farming, suddenly there was a shortage. So then agricultural product fell. Tourism went down, the foreign exchange ran short, and now comes a very complicated problem with China. China had lent money to Sri Lanka a lot, and the West had also lent money. The Rajapakshas were taking it. Is an awful crony capitalist system it's become. The Chinese money, I think Americans are overstating this, but the Chinese money is often given with the following contract. Let me explain this to you with the work that Amit Bhaduri did about Indian money lending in rural areas. It's a famous paper in 1973, Amit Bhaduri's paper, that a lot of Indian moneylenders will go and give money to a poor farmer, saying that here's the money, I want some guarantee that what are you holding against the money? And the farmer will say, I just have a small plot of land. And the moneylender gives you money, saying, if you can't pay back, I'll take away your land. Bhaduri shows that very often the moneylender's aim is not to get back your money. The moneylender in fact hopes you will default because the moneylender is then going to capture your land. So a lot of Indian money lending would take place where the moneylender's aim is moneylender hopes you will default, which is unusual. There's a lot of criticism that China had similar contracts with Sri Lanka, and they have captured a port virtually. Huge port has been taken over. When Sri Lanka started defaulting, China said, you can't pay us back, so we are taking charge of the port. So people are pointing out, I've also done some writing on this, that Sri Lanka got into these old Indian farming contracts with China, and that's a bigger trouble. When the trouble started, I think it was also the pride of the Rajapakshas. They did not quickly reach out. You do need international support. So IMF would come in, put conditions. They did not. And then it ran into a huge crisis. And main thing is foreign exchange all went out of the country. Zero foreign exchange, inflation picked up, devastated. Bangladesh was heading towards a similar problem. They very quickly reached out to IMF, got support, stalled. And Bangladesh also now, Bangladesh's foreign exchange reserves are pretty high for a country which is, compared to India, much smaller than India, but pretty high now. So they have got these buffers, but Sri Lanka fell completely into this. Economic policy, I also believe that at the top, you have to have openness to different ideas coming in. Rajapakshas were doing very little of that. I fear Xi Jinping, rich country, but still it's so authoritarian that they may make big mistakes in China, and the Chinese mistake will of course affect the whole world if they make mistakes. Yeah, anything else? Yeah.
So as we know that production of alcohol, cigarettes and all are means injurious and bad for the society. So why the government is investing money for the production of those things? There is loss of life as well as creating lots of issues in the society.
So the government is putting money in this? I don't think so.
Giving license or something
Giving-
like this.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Encouraging, sit down. So this is again a good question. My own sort of instinct in most things is to give people as much freedom as possible, even if they make wrong choices. Give them the freedom, but I'm aware that you can't do that. People are very often not educated. They are getting into habits and all, which will be painful for them. So, and most countries have started doing that. You put taxes on products which are harmful. Cigarettes, for instance, when we were young, it was very common. During my 3 years in college, I smoked cigarettes. Very fortunately, when I went to London to study, cigarettes were so expensive I couldn't smoke. So that was the end of it. But there are people who, I've got friends and all who huge amount, cigarettes and drugs and all suffer. And the government has to take some concern about these things. First thing I would do is teach people so that they have developed the responsibility and don't do these things. They realize that there are the dangers. But I agree, you have to take steps. If the government is actually, I don't know whether in some ways they are supporting. At times what happens, which is dreadful, some big businesses have an interest in this. And historically there have been from opium and other things. The big traders have interest, then the government will quietly support because the government wants the favors from that. And that will be just dreadful thing. I mean, you want to educate people first that they learn, but you have to have restrictions on some of the worst forms of practices that can destroy lives. And there are some societies, and I've traveled around the world, you see population just completely in Western Gujarat, in a tribal area. It was the women who were running because the men in the evening were all getting drunk. You could see that and being able to do nothing. And you can't blame them. They've grown up like that, the men, and they've got into this habit and fallen into a trap. And there, yes, the government and collectivity has a responsibility.
Continuation, the same question, why Western countries give free hand to the firearms?
Yeah.
The whole society.
Well, yeah. Western countries, many European countries don't do that. It's America which does it. Good question. America, carrying weapons, it's treated as a part of the American Constitution that you give. There are two things to this. Even if something is in the Constitution, which was drafted in 1789, is there, the world changes. First of all, the meaning of what is a gun has changed. Those days it would be small little things. And there you're living in farms far away, you may need it to support, defend yourself. I feel it's absolutely ridiculous that the US continues. There, it's a nexus between big business and the American government is what I feel. That people in government can see it's doing damage endlessly, the weapons. But there's a gun lobby that funds the political parties. And the government then will keep quiet, will not talk about the funding, but will continue to provide that. So it's just a big tragedy of government falling prey to big money.
Who is helping?
The political party to get into power. I mean, it's just bad politics. It's just there always. You're getting the money from the gun lobbies, then you're doing your election campaigns. People then vote for you because the campaigns are showing the good side of it. So it is just immediate self-interest in politics. I think in America it's ridiculous, absolutely. There's a devastating. Yeah, and when you get shootouts in school, people coming from outside. And my grandchildren go there. Even in school, you have to do drills on what should you do if there's a sudden attack. That itself is psychologically terrifying for children. You all have to learn what you do and this is an attack in your own country by your own people. A shocking lapse of policy.
Possible to amend the constitution?
Not impossible at all, but political parties don't have an interest in that. They make money through this, and this is the unfortunate thing of politics. And what you're saying, I mean, I don't know the specifics to your question, but there are items where the political parties and the party interest, which is not in the interest of the nation, but you continue with that.
So is the government not having any say against the political parties? They can't tell them not to do because it is harming the society and.
Yeah, but if they are making a lot of money by selling that product, harmful product, if the government tells them that, they will get very angry and not give government money.
So means it is the government who has to also suffer if
Sure, but that we will agree, but the government does not agree. The government at times has to suffer for the larger good of society. Yes?
We, the common people, have to suffer.
Yeah,
Living in this society, we have to suffer for both the government also as well as the political parties.
yeah. Yeah, so that's the unfortunate thing of life, and it's one just hopes that what can we do? We know what the government should do. What can we do? The best is if people understand, and this is what education is, that government can't make money through those bad methods and then use that money to brainwash you. That has to be stopped. And again, education is hopefully, but America is a pretty highly educated country. But the gun lobby is an illustration of what a lobby can do.
Means being educated, we have to suffer.
Yeah, but no one is causing, there's no easy way out of that. And what are you saying that, of course we should not, but who do we say this to? It's a bit like gravity. Society is full of gravitational things that we individually don't quite know what to do. It's a trap. The hope lies in this kind of awareness, talking, conversation. Ordinary people begin to learn, pick up pressure, and I have to say, a whole lot of American democratic leaders who are outraged by this, I think so, about the gun lobby, state of the gun lobby. But they are also individually in a trap of a huge machinery of politics out of which they can't break out. India, poor country, much more illiteracy, education is low, so you can easily use money, put up posters where people will not understand that there is a responsibility with the government for a lot of this. I had other topics, but I think I won't go into that. I'll go to Kunnabo. 10 minute দিতে পারি I'm thinking next topic I'm choosing between two topics. I'll give you a choice. One topic is very different kind of economics where my guru Amartya Sen had his important work, which is on voting systems, majority decision rule and such things. The other is where I have done some work. It's on corruption control. The economics. Your favorite topic is corruption control. Gosh, you're getting me worried. Okay, I will do that. Then I'll do that. I both of these I'm comfortable with. Corruption I can actually, because I work in government. I can tell you this is a completely honest statement. You have to believe me. I never saw an act of corruption in front of my own eyes. I worked in government for 4 years, 3 years. That does not mean there isn't corruption. I know what happened myself. I came from outside. I have a job outside. I would go back outside. Everyone knew. So they also knew not to have a corrupt act in my presence. I would keep a record of it. And some of them may have thought that someday he will publish a diary, which I did, where he would put that. So I never saw that. It is true. I knew some politicians who are known to be corrupt. People tell me, and I knew. But I never an action in front of me where a bribe is being exchanged, but it was there. And I got concerned, I can tell you about one corruption. Corruption control is, by the way, it is not easy. That you also have to realize. There are lots of politicians who make money out of corruption, dreadful. But there are also lots of good people in government, the police, in the bureaucracy, who wanted to go, and just there's no immediate mechanism where you don't bring the economy to a halt. And I'll get into something specific on corruption, which I had tried to do. But let me before that tell you, Indians park illegal money abroad, in Mauritius, in Switzerland, in Singapore. You make money illegally and you park it there. There used to be a lot of discussion of this needed to be stopped. There was one discussion which was brought up during my time, that why not check every Indian transaction anywhere in the world? I said, if you do that, you bring normal transactions to a halt. As it is, bureaucracy in India is overwhelming. Then if every transaction you have to do paperwork, then Indians can't be in global business. So to stop corruption, you have to be very careful that you are not halting legitimate activity. So I feel that demonetization, for instance, no matter what the intention, you're just damaging too much of the economy. Ordinary people going about their business to capture the black money, and in the end, you don't even capture that. So intention, even if it was right, completely wrong mechanism was being used. Likewise, there are many domains where you have to think through the art of how you control. One used to interest me a lot, bribery. The reason I got interested in bribery is when I was an ordinary citizen, a professor teaching somewhere, nothing to do with government, I faced many situations. Go to driving license you're going to get, you drive well, the person asks for a bribe. Bribe is being asked here and there. And when I joined government, no one was asking me for a bribe like that, and I could see that easily. I'm in government, they are scared to do that. Bribery used to trouble me a lot. I feel it. Some economists say bribery allows the economy to be oiled and function well. To me, it's unacceptable. Bribery is just a demoralizing thing. There are situations when you're in a trap, you can do nothing else. But it's dreadful. As a system, you want to get rid of it. On bribery, I think I did get an understanding of what is causing bribery, and you have to do these things intelligently, you have to design to stop. India's bribery prevention is done by a law from 1988. It's called Prevention of Corruption Act. The Prevention of Corruption Act holds the bribe giver and the bribe taker as equally punishable. Do you follow? That if a policeman asks you for a bribe and you give a bribe, you are punishable, the policeman is punishable. And even if the bribe is completely unfair, there are situations where you've done nothing wrong, you are being asked for a bribe. An example is you're paying your tax and you've done it all properly, but the tax person says, "Till you give me some money in cash, I will not pass it." These are harassment bribes, bribes harassing people for nothing wrong that they have done. It struck me that there is something in the Indian law which makes bribery more common. Since both the giver and the taker of the bribe gets punished, suppose you've been asked for a complete unfair bribe. You've done nothing wrong, someone comes and asks you for a bribe. You're forced to give it. You give the bribe. Will you, after, given the Indian law, will you after that stand up in the court and say, "I gave the bribe"? Will you do it? No, because you know the law is going to have you punished along with the bureaucrat. So after you have given a bribe, and this is, I brought in a little bit of game theory into this. After you have given the bribe to the police, you hated the police. You've done nothing wrong, the police comes and asks for a bribe. You give the bribe. After you've given the bribe, you and the police will act like friends in keeping this information secret. You will collude. You will tell no one, because both of you will be punished. So the idea struck me, if we could amend this law and say that when and this kind of an unfair bribe is asked for, the person who takes the bribe should be punished, maybe doubly punished. The person who gave the bribe, was forced to give a bribe, should not be punished. It's called asymmetric punishment law. So this was a suggestion that I made a mistake. I wrote it up on the Ministry of Finance's website. I was new to government. I didn't realize this would become very controversial. I wrote back and said that the law should be changed so that the giver and the taker should be treated differently in the event of a bribe. The political part of it, I can tell you, which was quite exciting and nerve-wracking that time. This caused a huge uproar. There was members of parliament writing to the Prime Minister saying that an immoral idea has been posted on the Ministry of Finance website. The chief economic advisor should be asked to leave the government and go for putting this up. So, and there were criticisms in newspapers being written, and there was a particular CPI member wrote, I have nothing against him also, I mean, that's the way he thought, wrote to the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister asking me to leave. I'll tell you the sort of story part of it a little bit. When this was going on, my wife was getting more stressed than I was getting. I don't get too stressed. She was getting very stressed. Barkha phoned me on a Saturday or Sunday, it was a weekend evening. Barkha said, "Professor Basu, will you come on my television show and explain your idea, which is causing so much discontent?" So I was about to go, and then I thought, maybe I should talk to the Prime Minister, whether he wants me to continue to talk about this, because he's getting letters against me. So it was a weekend. I phoned the Prime Minister's residence and said, I first wanted to phone Pranab Mukherjee, but he was away in Vietnam at that time. Then I phoned the Prime Minister's residence. The person, I said, I need to talk to the Prime Minister about whether I should talk more about this idea, trying to explain. That was the first time I was directly talking to the Prime Minister after the controversy had started, and I knew he had got letters. I've got copies of those letters now with me as preserved about me. I phoned the Prime Minister. The person who picked up said he will call back in 10 minutes. I will check with the Prime Minister. 10 minutes later, the Prime Minister came on the phone directly and said, Kaushik, you wanted some advice from me. I said, Prime Minister, I have not talked to you, but I know that you've got a lot of grief from this idea about corruption control that I've given. He cut me down and he said, Kaushik, actually, I don't agree with you. By giving or taking, you have to, both are totally unacceptable. I started arguing. I said, Prime Minister, you haven't read my paper, you just read the newspaper articles. He said, yes, I have not read the paper, just newspaper. I said, I kept talking. He said, no, Kaushik, I actually do disagree with you on this. But I'm telling you this because I was very moved what he said after that. He said, though I disagree with you, you take the decision whether you want to appear on television and argue about your idea, because the purpose of an advisor is to bring ideas to the table. And the fact that I disagree with you should not stop you from doing this. I was very touched by this, and later on, I remember in a G20 meeting, one of the advanced economies, someone was saying, only in advanced economies do you get this kind of space that a leader will give you. So this put me into this. I thought I will leave. There were a few pieces came out in newspapers defending me. And I remember, because these were of 2, 3 very, very difficult times, Narayan Murthy wrote a piece saying that, these problems of corruption, you have to handle intelligently as well. You can't crash the whole economy to stop corruption. And the analogy that I was using that time is like if you're doing surgery. Just because there is a malignant part of the human being, you can't just attack that malignant organ, paying no attention to the healthy organs around, that you have to just take that out and damage everything else. Corruption control is this very careful weaving in and out of this. India lives with a lot of corruption. In the corruption index figure, I personally believe, yes, you need intelligent laws, and I was trying to draft one. That law never went through, by the way. I was also very moved at that time by some feminists who wrote to me supporting very nicely. In Shruti Daho Protha, about Shruti, India's Shruti practice. For a long time, there was a law saying the witnessing of the sati is a crime. Because witnessing is typically people go there and cheer when Shruti Daho is taking place. That's also a crime. One feminist, yes, in fact, I remember who it was, wrote to me and saying that I'm reminding you what you're saying is sounding a bit similar. It was later realized that if you make witnessing sati a crime, it's very difficult to find a case of sati, because no one will say I witnessed it. So for strategic design, you can't make witnessing a crime. Even if you think it's bad, you can't make that a crime. You have to remove that from being a crime so that there will be people who come up and say, I've witnessed it. So design is very, very important for these kinds of controls. And I have got very involved with that. And also it did help me that I knew in terms of intention, I shared with the Prime Minister the intention that you want to cut it out, but a difficult problem. What I want to end with is, I've come back several times. Corruption control entirely by design. As an economist, I would do the design of policy, how you punish, etc. But again, the moral hardwiring is crucial. There are certain things you do just because you think that's the right thing to do. And we economists don't give enough room for that. But a modern society, a good society, is made possible when we have these moral wirings. That it's not just what the punishment will be. I just don't do certain things. It's wrong to do that. Human beings are capable of having these higher motivations, and to build that up so that goes across society is crucial, unless the hardwiring is changed. And the hardwiring can be changed. Human beings can have these hardwirings of certain moral principles by which you lead life, you live through life. Yeah.
In retrospect, Kaushik, what do you think if that idea was taken by the government? Would it have a better way of controlling corruption, or it would have been sudden to disrupt the society?
I don't think so. I feel this idea, you'd have to do the law a bit carefully so people don't then pretend that they were being forced to wear pride everywhere. But I feel it would be useful, and we've now discovered that there was an article in Financial Times after I read it, that there are some Scandinavian countries where you have this asymmetric crime. like smoking drugs, the seller is punished, not the buyer is punished. These are used so that you break the collusion between the two, and you have to decide which side you are going to punish. I do believe this is a good idea. I can also see that for government to say that giving a bribe is not punishable sounds so awful that most governments balk at that and then don't go for it. Yeah.
Not necessarily that it sounded awful, but probably once it is amended, like the constitution, if it doesn't work, then
you can put it back. So, laws, you have to, for some laws, you have to take a step. If it's not working, you have to pull back, you have to do a little bit of experimentation. Also, there are other areas where I have been looking at, some of those actually ideas were taken up. I'll give you one very concrete idea from economics which was taken